Hello, you're listening to Sending the Experts with Georgina Durrant. This podcast is all about teaching and supporting children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities, SEND. My name is Georgina Durrant. I'm the host of this podcast brought to you by Twinkle SEND. As a former teacher and Senko myself, I want to create a platform to share some of the amazing things that my guests are doing to support learners with SEND. So whether you're listening on your commute, tuning in whilst walking your dog, or curled up on the sofa with a nice cup of coffee, thank you so much for joining us. Today, I've got the real pleasure of chatting to the very lovely Suzy Rowland. Suzy is an author, autism and ADHD specialist, cognitive behavioural therapy practitioner and speaker. She founded the Happy in School project to address educational inequalities by providing creative and interactive training and consultancy rooted in lived experience. She works directly with local authorities, families and young people, examining hotspots and building connections to enable educators and families to work collaboratively for successful educational outcomes. The project started off as a forum for autism and ADHD parent advocacy and quickly developed into detailed training programs for mental health professionals, educators and complex organisations. Wow, Suzy, that's pretty impressive. Hi.
Hi, Georgina. God, I think, wow, that person sounds amazing.
It's you.
Oh.
So how are you? How are you doing?
I'm really well, and thank you so much for inviting me to chat to you. I feel like I know you. We've already done so much sort of social media chat, so it's really nice to talk to you today.
Oh, you too. I've been really looking forward to having a little chat with you all week, so that's good. So your background, I've gone over your amazing background a little bit, but can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, and in particular for our listeners, why you're so passionate about special educational needs?
Yes, I mean, for me, the real passion comes from a sense of humanity and also a real passion for education. So, like many of your listeners, I come from a bit of a tradition of a family of teachers.
Yeah.
So, my late mother was a teacher, an English teacher, and that explains my love of writing and creative writing and poetry. And it skipped a generation, so I went into sort of marketing and communications and copywriting, and my daughter is a primary teacher, so education has been something that is really sort of in my DNA and in my family's DNA. And I remember even my grandfather, who was born and brought up in the Caribbean, he could recite whole passages from Shakespeare
Wow.
well into his 80s. I mean, yeah, I mean, so we just love learning and education, and it's something that I think, particularly as sort of Caribbean descendants, it's a really important part of certainly my culture and my family's culture in terms of how you get to where you want to go, how you develop passions, your strengths, your talents, whatever it might be, if it's writing or art or sport or whatever. We've always really sort of instinctively understood the power of education to help you go from A to Z.
Brilliant. I love that. That's a
Yeah.
really lovely explanation.
Yeah.
So if we start with your Happy in School project, you founded and you run the Happy in School project. What is it? Why did you set it up and who is it for?
Yeah. So my personal journey to my passion around SEND, the SEND part of education, is through my son, like many practitioners. My son was diagnosed with ADHD and autism spectrum condition aged 9. And we'd had quite a bumpy primary, lots of exclusions and lots of difficulties and different schools, because I kept thinking, well, maybe this school will be better. And it's a common pattern that parents can tend to hop around schools until they find the right setting, particularly if they're undiagnosed, because you don't really know what you're dealing with actually.
Yeah.
So it's sort of logical to think, well, if I change the environment, but you don't always know how to change the environment that you're already in, actually.
Yeah, that's
So
a really
a
good
lot of,
point. Yeah, like not
yeah,
having the control in that classroom to be able to make the changes that your child needs. So thinking actually a fresh start, would that be a better option?
absolutely, and I see it a lot with the parents that I meet through the Happy in School project. So really, it was me taking everything I'd learned from my sort of previous life and sort of communications and copywriting and sales and marketing, and thinking, how can I take what I've learned personally and also through my experience with my son and all of this change and trauma and develop a sort of advocacy program training type thing. I mean, I just sort of thought, I'm going to do this. And I actually didn't think too hard about it, which is, with hindsight, you think, oh my goodness. But I was so committed. And actually, through his whole diagnosis process, I had to leave my main job, my sort of previous career. And that's, again, a really common
Yeah.
thing, that tends to be a parent who just has to take on sorry, the responsibility of working with the school, going to appointments, going to therapies, and getting that child settled. And
Yeah.
that was me. So I had plenty of time to think and retrain. And I just grew more and more fascinated in what was going on, and all of the aspects of it, the aspects of parents' insecurity, teachers' insecurities as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, even though you're trained as a teacher, and I saw it with my daughter. Huge confidence in teaching, but in some cases, particularly newly qualified teachers, a bit less confidence in managing some of those quote more challenging children.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. I don't think there's enough training. There's not enough out there for it, is there?
no, no. And that's, I discovered that in my first book, in terms of the levels of training. I mean, as we know, certainly is a huge area,
Mhm.
and it's kind of distilled into a couple of modules on the
Yeah.
teacher training. So I know that there's lobbying around changing that,
Yes.
but as far as I know, they're still coming out with pretty basic understanding of what
Yeah.
SEN looks like in the classroom. So I just sort of went at it, and I liked Happy in School, because I thought, well, that's a nice goal. Your school day should be the best days of your life, kind of.
Yeah.
um, Not in my son's case, and not in many of the children who
No.
I work with. And I thought, well, there's got to be ways that we can, collectively, parents, professionals, teachers, school leaders, we can work together, we can fill the gaps, we can get this done and get this sorted. So that was my goal, and it's very much on a positive outcome, because so much of the parent experience, and the child experience, can be negative. So it had to be, what can we do to
Yeah.
make it much happier experience? And lots of answers. But if that's the goal, to have a well balanced, happy child, a happy child is more willing and open to learn.
Yeah. Completely.
And I think if we even take all of the adjustments and interventions out of the picture, what are we doing enough to make our kids feel happy in school? Are we doing enough to make them feel relaxed? And we've had COVID, for goodness sake, and it's like a
Yeah.
huge stressor. And I think the concept of well-being is now become really mainstream,
Yeah.
which
Definitely.
is, it's just a joy to see that development over the last sort of 5, 6, 7 years. It's really good to see that happen. So
Yeah.
that's the
Oh, I
philosophy.
love it. You're so inspirational. I love that you just wanted to make, well, it's just your goal to make children happy. I just love that. I think that's wonderful. You sound like such a mother hen in that you've like gathered everything together to make everyone better in school and like collect, but in a positive way, not in like a teacher bashing sort of, this is what's gone wrong. It sounds more like it's positive and bringing people together and sort of nurturing the environment and making children happy. I love that. Oh, it's brilliant. Can
And
you
that's going to be my new nickname, Mother Hen. I can see that sticking.
Oh, the other thing that I noticed you do is it's called the Teens Girls Circle. What can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a project that is, I piloted that last year. Again, one of those things I thought, I know. I have lots of girls coming, and that also feeds into the I Can't Go to School book, because lots of the young people I worked with around school, non-attendants, were young girls. Although there were some boys, it was the majority of them I was working with. Still
Oh
am
wow.
working with girls, yes. And I saw lots of patterns in those girls, not least their neurodivergence,
Hmm.
but also patterns about self-esteem, patterns about confidence, patterns about, you know, who am I? How do I be a neurodivergent girl? How do I fit in? You know, that whole Mean Girls thing.
Yes.
How do I fit in? I mean, I can really resonate, because I always didn't feel I fitted in at school. So I have a real affinity, and I thought, I'm going to get all these girls together, and we're going to do some relaxation. We're going to do some talking therapy around school. We're going to look at building confidence. We're going to do some creative stuff. And I say it was a pilot, and it's in sort of in development stage. But one of the interesting things I learned was, as much as the intention was good, because the anxiety levels in some girls are so high, even getting to the sessions,
Oh,
yeah.
wow. So
And
even
I
that is
didn't,
hard.
absolutely, and I didn't want it to be an online thing.
Yeah.
Although at the moment I'm looking at all options being explored, and I've got a bit of a sort of task force group together, so that's kind of bubbling under, which I will be progressing. But I still think that the therapy and the healing for the particular cohort of girls comes from meeting other girls
Yeah.
who are going through similar things. And once they're in the door, I mean, we had such firm friendships, but
Yeah.
the anxiety just to come in. So that was the real learning for me, because I had anticipated, well, maybe going to school is difficult.
Yeah.
But this is great. But it just goes to show that the anxiety is kind of all pervasive.
Yeah.
Um, it's really difficult for families. So
Absolutely. Yeah, I
watch
can
this
see that.
space.
Yeah, that sounds really good what you're doing. But yeah, such a good point about the anxiety about coming to the sessions and stuff. And being it is tough being a teenage girl. It is really hard to find your place and to feel accepted. And girls are mean and complicated, and the friendships are very, very complicated, especially, and it can be even more so for neurodivergent kids, can't it? Because of the sort of social
Absolutely.
nuances and all of that, that just is tricky.
Absolutely. I mean, it's there's a whole new work stream that's coming out of that, which is I've just really enjoyed. And I think looking at neurodivergence, you know, my experience has shown, yes, we do have differences in presentation between girls and boys. Um, However, this cohort is also very unique in how they view themselves, how they identify. And I'm meeting a lot of girls who are, you know, they're non-binary, or
Yeah.
they may not identify with their peers for a number of reasons. So I think, yes, let's call it girls, but you know,
Yeah.
I learned a lot in that process. Put it
Yeah.
that way.
No, that's a
And
very good point. Yeah.
yes,
Oh, it's good to see it's
that's
very inclusive as well. That's great. So,
yes,
in the background, and I'm going to tell everybody that Suzy actually made this background of her room really lovely and smart for this. It always looks like this, doesn't it, Suzy? But in the background, in the background, I can spot one of your books, your Send in the Clowns book. Can you see it just there?
yeah,
Yeah. So can we ask you about that? So, can you tell us more about the
yeah.
book and what inspired you to write Send in the Clowns?
Yeah, yeah. So that was my my second book and my first book on Send. So it's semi-autobiographical. So all of the issues around my son's diagnosis and what was happening, and you know, I look back, and it was kind of really intense, and
Yeah.
a lot of that experience sort of works through the Happy in School project, and I can really empathize because I've lived it. So I began writing diary notes, you know, what he'd had a bad day at school, or I
Yeah.
had, you know, I was called by the teacher in the playground, which was literally like, so, I'm just getting anxiety just thinking about
Oh.
it. And you know, there's, can we have a word? And you think,
Oh
oh,
gosh.
yeah. And all of that kind of thing. So all of those diary notes started to become more narrative in tone, and I thought, maybe this is something I can share, and put my pain into a positive context for other
Yeah.
people. Um, and so when we got to a point much later in his life that he was sort of settled and in secondary school, although his second secondary school, not the first one, that didn't work either.
Oh,
Um, so I thought that I'd take a step back, and it not just be like a sort of sob story, because we've all got something that's similar. So I wanted it to be more about information and ASD and autism together, and experiences around boys and around black boys, and the things that I'd learned that were positive, and things like how you can build a good relationship with the school, and how
yeah.
you can do your research on what kind of schools might work if you get the diagnosis, and how you can complain if you need to, and how you might want to even things like all the acronyms, SALT and ELSA,
Yeah.
what does all this mean? And
Yeah.
so I very much went into sort of help mode, mother hen mode.
Mother hen mode.
And I thought, I'm going to capture all this. And if there's someone who is 10, 15 years younger than me, just going
Mm,
through that process, this book will help them, because it will bring my story to life so I can empathize, and it will give them the nuts and bolts of the basics of what it all means. What does EHCP stand for? Um, is it useful? How is it useful? How do you get one?
yeah.
Um, what to do if you don't get one? What does SEND support mean? So I just downloaded my brain and thought, that's going to help someone someday.
Wow,
Uh,
that's amazing. It's almost like having like somebody, like another mum or another parent to talk to, almost, who's been there and done that and got some advice to pass on to you, because I imagine it can be very isolating being a parent of a child with special educational needs and disabilities, because you've not got the same, there's not the same number, is there, of people, of parents that you're going to get on with who've got the same experience as you, that you can ask questions, and because yeah, for me, for example, if my kids aren't sleeping very well, you can ask lots of parents about that, but you're sort of looking at a more niche sort of there's less people to talk to about the problems you're facing. So it's almost like your book is that person. You're like,
yeah,
people can use
yeah,
it to answer those questions that they don't know the answer to.
absolutely. Absolutely. I must say, I mean, when I was going through the diagnosis, when we were going through the diagnosis, I didn't do the sort of Facebook forums. I'm not the kind of person um, who I like to share things with people I don't know.
Yeah,
And and also, like everyone, I thought, well, maybe my question's silly, and I also felt very out of the loop because I was working full
yeah.
time, and still a little bit of anxiety, because I even had a head teacher say, well, if you weren't working, maybe he wouldn't behave like this. Yeah, yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So I still felt anxious about, well, that sort of mother guilt
Oh my
thing.
goodness. Like, I can't believe someone said that to you, Susie. I'm feeling cross about that. That's appalling.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So, you know, people have all different views and perspectives,
Mm,
and I always kind of felt, if you have to work, you have to work.
yeah,
If you can stay at home, you stay at home, and it's everyone has to make the decision
mm,
based on their personal situation. And it is complicated if your child has additional needs, without doubt,
yeah,
because then you get into the issues of, well, you may be encountering financial difficulties because you've had to go part time, or
yeah.
give up your job, or change career. So for me, writing it down and sort of going, here you go, this might help, um, rather than having to sort of face people online, or because some people can say things that can be very hurtful,
Mm,
and particularly, if you're neurodivergent yourself, you can misinterpret how someone says something, or you can get
yeah.
the wrong end of the topic. So I think there's an absolute place for social media support groups and Facebook groups and WhatsApp groups. Absolutely. But in the same way, with the sort of girls groups, I think there's also a place to have something you can just have by yourself and highlight it and read it and think about it,
Yeah,
and a place to have face-to-face connections as well. So for me, I was thinking of people who may not want to do that whole group thing, and they may
yeah,
have issues that they don't want to share, because people can be quite judgmental, actually.
absolutely, especially behind a keyboard. Unfortunately, people don't see yeah, they don't see the person, so they're hidden behind a keyboard and can be a little bit cruel, can't they? To put it
Yes,
lightly.
yes, exactly. So hopefully, sending the clowns. I've had amazing feedback from people,
Good.
which that's just been my raison d'etre. That's why I did it.
Yeah.
Because it was published during COVID, so the bookshops weren't open. The worst possible time to
I
put
know.
a book out. But the people still find it, which is fantastic, and it's still helpful and relevant.
Good.
And that's job done for me.
Yeah, and I'm curious, Send in the Clouds, like why the book title? Who are the clowns?
Well, there is a film called Send in the Clowns, and there's
Hmm.
a whole soundtrack which is really beautiful. Um, but lots of kids and parents have been described as being the class clown.
Yeah.
And we all see clowns as being kind of, they're funny, they're at the circus, but I see the kind of sadness, behind the
Mm,
clown character. And also I see the whole masking, you know,
yeah.
literally masking. And a lot of the kids who, not just boys actually, who present as the class clown, and they're disruptive, and they're really seeking approval from their peers and their friends. And when you talk to them one to one, they're doing that because they feel they don't want everyone to know that they can't read,
Yeah.
or they don't want people to know that they find it hard to sit still, or they feel,
Yeah.
whatever their issue is, and whether or not they're neurodivergent, there is always a reason for that level of clowning.
Yes.
So for me, it was just kind of taking a different perspective on those kids, and not immediately looking at them as troublemakers or disruptive, and say, what's going on behind that really loud, extroverting, got to
Yeah.
make the whole class laugh character? So that
Yeah.
that was kind of what was behind it.
That's brilliant. Yeah, and you're so right about children that are, acting up and being disruptive, and there being reasons behind it. Because quite often, I think if you've got to make a choice, and you can get it, especially being a teenager, if you've got to make a choice between people knowing you can't read that text, or people knowing you can't write as well as them, or making people laugh and being a bit disruptive, you're probably going to choose the being disruptive, because it's socially more acceptable, isn't it? And it's easier to be that person.
Definitely. And if you think about it, there's loads of comedians and actors, and when they're interviewed, they say, "Oh, I was always a class clown. I was always mucking about, making everything
Mm,
laugh because I found lessons really boring, or I couldn't read. I didn't know then, but I was dyslexic." So there's a kind of rationale to it, and so I'm really always interested in those characters.
yeah. So in
So
Send in the Clouds, you also write about the connection between race and autism, and some of the barriers you face in accessing support for your child as a mum of Black Caribbean heritage. And you discuss how Black children in particular are often more likely to be excluded from schools in the UK than their white peers. Can you tell us more about this?
yes, yes, I can. I mean, I think that again, that's a whole topic, and
It
and
is
the
a big
issue
topic.
the issue of race. Liz Pemberton, who is on Twitter, I think, and Instagram as the
Yeah,
Black Community Manager, talks really, really deeply about what's happening in the classroom uh, to Black children, and I'm saying Black specifically rather than any other acronym, because I think everyone knows what I mean.
hmm,
Um, and what's happening in the early years.
Yeah.
which then kind of creates a trajectory towards what happens when they go to secondary school. And it's complicated in that we've got beautiful kids and they come in, they're full of sunshine and enthusiasm, and as lots of children are. But somewhere down the line, when they are, particularly black boys, are growing up and they become bigger and physical, there's something that changes in the mindset of the adults around them,
Right.
particularly in schools, which they perceive as somehow threatening or aggressive. And you think about it, I like to look at it as a kind of hidden vulnerability,
Yeah.
because obviously I've got a lot of relatives and nieces and nephews, and I'm thinking, no, yeah, he looks kind of big. He's really tall and he's really filled out. And he said, "Oh, hi, Auntie," and he's come and give me a
Oh.
kiss and a hug. And I'm thinking, if I didn't know you and I just
Mm.
passed you on the street, what would my impression of you be? There's a
Yeah.
classic advert years ago. I think it was for the Guardian newspaper, and they had a picture of a still of a black guy running and a little old lady, and it said, what do you think's happening here? And obviously the kind of subtext is he's may have stolen her purse, he's running after her, or he's
Mm.
mugged her or something. And actually it was the other way round. He was running to give her her purse that she
Oh,
dropped. But
gosh.
the visual, we feel we've kind of learned subconsciously
Mm.
right from the early years that this particular visual of a young male is a threat to
Yeah.
society. And I think I mean, I haven't got the capacity or the time to talk it through, but I would certainly recommend um, Liz as she talks through this the very subtle changes that happen. So as that young boy grows into a man.
Mhm.
And also we have the issue of of what's happening in the classroom. We tend to have mainly female teachers.
Yep.
So again, we have that kind of gender
Mhm.
thing that there might be an anxiety, if a young boy is neurodivergent and he's dysregulated and he's shouting. I mean, it happens with all neurodivergent children. There could be an anxiety about what's going to happen.
Yeah.
How am I going to manage or contain this? But somewhere down the line, through some kind of programming and misinformation and all of these other things that we call
Mm.
stereotypes, um, we've got a real kind of sort of perception issue,
Mm.
actually, which I think is interesting. And I think there's lots of other people, I can't think of the other woman's name, who do great work. Penny, it's gone out of my head. She does great work on diversity and inclusion
Yeah.
in schools. And I think it's a slow moving machine. It's a very slow
Yeah.
machine, but progress is being made, but there's a huge amount that we need to do. And even people like Jamal Carley, who is obviously a black male teacher,
Yeah.
uh, I think there's a lot of work to do,
Yeah.
and I always felt that that the perception of my son and his character and his personality, I would sometimes be in meetings and think, you thought he was going to do that?
Yeah. You don't know my
What?
son.
Where did that come from? Why did you think he was acting aggressively? And this is the challenge with neurodiversity across the piece. It's the decoding of those behaviours.
Yeah. Gosh, that must have been
But it
really hard as a mum though, and see like having people viewing your son incorrectly.
Yeah, absolutely. It's difficult for parents, as say, across the piece. But when you think there's a possibility of not only are they misunderstanding this
Mm.
behaviour, but they are perceiving it in a negative way
Yeah.
because of what they are seeing and what they think they are seeing that
Yeah.
might be oppressive. So it is very complicated. But I would only say that there is lots of information out there. There's lots of training. And I also think that there has to be a sort of responsibility to
Mm.
address yourself as an individual. Well, when I did my girls talk, and I was really interested, this whole area of gender, I need to address what my thoughts are about that.
Yeah.
And in
Yeah,
and
sort of
in the same
unpick,
way,
yeah, your sort of
absolutely.
your own experiences and how you've been programmed yourself, and actually thinking about have you got any stereotypes that you're not even aware of?
Absolutely. So we all have biases,
Mm.
and I think that we have to look at ourselves as educators and professionals, and try to look in the mirror and
Yeah.
where is my bias, and even the data is there that black boys without a neurodivergence are reprimanded, told off more often than their white peers
Wow.
for the same misdemeanor. There's all the data there. There's an
Gosh.
organization called Black Thrive. So the data is there. This is not a sort of a made up thing.
Mm.
So for me, it's about everybody in that triangle: parents, teachers, educators, having a look at themselves.
Yeah.
And it's not always, how we say it, it's not always teacher bad, parent good either.
Yeah.
It's just about what's happening here, and that's actually where Happy in School, the work that I do, is very much about taking the fire out of some of these difficult situations.
Yeah. That's it.
Um,
Yeah, and so important. So what should schools be doing then to address this, and making sure that black boys aren't being excluded more, and they're not being reprimanded more? What apart from looking in the mirror and thinking, which is really really important, about thinking about their own bias, what else can they be doing? Is there anything they could be doing to make things better?
Yeah, I mean, I think there needs to be a real transparency. I mean, look at the data, and
Hmm.
and and just recognizing what's happening, and
Yeah.
acknowledging that is happening first of all, and then looking at the recruitment processes, looking at the you know the if you have I can't think of the word, what sanctions are you putting in place? Are you responding more harshly to a
Yeah.
particular cohort? Because we do know the statistics show, the government UK statistics show that not only is that cohort excluded more frequently, so is Gypsy and Roma, and so are
Hmm.
kids with special additional needs.
Yeah.
So we do have already a built-in bias
Hmm.
towards particular groups of children
Yeah.
who might need a bit more support and help.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a slight knee-jerking going on, but I do like the idea of rather than saying there is an owner of a problem, I like to think of it as we all own this problem, and
Yeah.
what are we going to do about it collectively? Um,
Yes.
and also building up trust with parents. That's a really important thing. If a parent saying, "Well, why did this happen, and how come he's been excluded 3 times?" Well, let's be transparent. Maybe let's look at this. Just look
Yeah.
at the data, look at the actions, and really start to establish some transparent relationships.
Yeah, that's so important. And I know you've talked in your book as well about the underdiagnosis, particularly with autism for Black boys. Why do you think that's happening? Because I know we did a podcast episode recently about autism in girls, and I think that's been covered quite widely now, about the idea that there's definitely been an underdiagnosis of girls who are autistic girls. But what
Mhm.
about, yeah, Black boys? Because I'm really interested in them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a researcher, but the research that I've done indicates that when the diagnosis was being discovered,
Hmm.
all of the research was done with 7-year-old white boys, which is
Right.
exactly why girls are
Girls.
underdiagnosed, and black and Asian and other minority groups,
Yeah.
also minority groups, are also underdiagnosed, because if you're looking for a certain thing and you've looked for it and it looks like this,
Yeah.
what is your sort of standard marker? Well, but we didn't see it like this in this case. Then you've got to take into cultural
Yeah.
considerations, all the subtleties of communication and social expectations, you say, if you're thinking about girls. So I think that in some ways the science needs to catch up.
Yeah. Gosh, it's awful, isn't it, that it's still based on 7-year-old white boys and just
That,
one small cohort when we've got
yes.
so, oh my goodness, yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
ridiculous.
And also with adults, I mean, we now know that adult ADHD is a thing, and
Yeah,
a lot of adults would have qualified for an autism diagnosis had they had one
yeah.
um, 50 years ago, and they've had a lifetime of difficulties and
Mhm.
struggles. So I think for me, I'm very much in favour of looking at particularly neurodiversity and the neurodivergent profiles. I really focus on ADHD and autism because they're the two I know most about, as being a neurotype rather than being a neurodeficit.
Yes.
This is just how we are. These
Mhm.
are the types of brains that
Yeah.
that the perceptions might be around this, the profiles might be around this, and the patterns may be like this, and the interactions might be like this. That's what that particular neurotype brings to the world.
Yeah.
And I think once there's a sort of wholesale catch up, I mean, everyone talks about autism awareness. I think the awareness is pretty good.
Yeah.
Um, it's about acceptance,
Yeah.
and then we get to a point where we don't have just 29% of autistic young adults in employment, which is
Gosh.
exactly, exactly. So yeah, awareness, yeah, fine. Let's move on to looking at acceptance and support and develop and the proper full engagement in society, if that is something that the individual is capable of, and that starts at school.
Yes, and that leads me on to my next set of questions, which is all about your second book, which came out in December. I Can't Go to School, the school non-attendance workbook. Can you tell us all about that then? So congratulations again, by the way, for the publication in
Thank
December.
you. Thank you. Yes, yeah. So this one was kind of fell out of the work I was doing with families and lots of girls who weren't able to go to school, and it also felt right because it was written during COVID, and
Yeah,
there was so much change, there was so much focus on mental health in young people, and a lot of the young people who I was seeing were already presenting with mental health difficulties around school
yeah,
before we went into lockdown, the first lockdown.
right.
So it isn't just something that's happened at all. It was
Mhm.
there before. But I think now, because in some areas, I was reading some newspaper reports about in York regions, there are still lots of children who the schools just haven't got back to their pre-COVID attendance
Yeah,
levels, and there's a huge amount of work going into that. What's going on? And it's interesting because some families and children think, well, actually, we quite liked this hybrid style of
yeah.
of
I've
working.
heard this a few times on the podcast. There's been a few guests that have said this about children actually. They were happier. The home learning was actually better for them. And then going back to school for them didn't make sense, especially logically. They were happy at home and doing well with their studies. And it didn't make sense that then suddenly they had to go into this building that they weren't as happy in.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think it really highlights the fact that as society is changing and evolving, and with different mindsets and different minds, it is the school system. Does it need to catch up
Mm,
as a charity? Maybe yes or no. But what we can look at is the individuals that are working in the
yeah,
system. The individuals that the system itself, is a slow moving machine. But if we fill it with people who have fresh thinking and fresh approaches and understand that in some cases, maybe it isn't right for every single child to be educated in a physical building.
yeah.
That's quite a revolutionary and radical
Mm,
concept, which has only really become an issue since we were invited to educate our children at home.
yeah.
But the seed has been sown, hasn't it?
Mm, absolutely.
And
It makes you think. It makes you think, is this the right thing? Are we doing the right thing for all the children here? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, some during COVID, some did miss out on that
Yeah.
structure. and their support that they had in school and all of that. But I also think there is a place for well supported, financially and intellectually supported alternatives. But
Yeah.
there still seems to be a lot of resistance to that.
Yeah.
And I touch on that in the book in terms of all different, forest schools, flexible schooling, unschooling.
Yeah.
There are various ways that people want to try something different, and because we know that for some children, not just the anxiety, but then you would get the social anxiety, and then you get the academic pressures.
Yeah.
So there are many reasons why it is for some young people just not
Not
working out
working.
at all, and we are literally trying to squeeze those square pegs into round holes.
Yeah, absolutely. And more focusing perhaps on the attendance figures rather than the reasons behind and what we can do to support these children, which is heartbreaking. So if there will be, I was going to say, if there's teachers listening, there are teachers listening. The teachers that are listening, there
All
better
the
be
teachers
teachers
are
listening.
listening.
The teachers that are listening, what advice would you give them that they can use tomorrow? Because often I think I do this when I'm listening to podcasts or watching things. You have like a child in your head, don't you? Or like a few children in your head, and you're
Yeah.
thinking, oh gosh, what about so and so? They are struggling with attendance. Or if someone's got someone in their mind, what can they do tomorrow? What can they walk into school tomorrow and do
Yes.
differently to make an
Yeah.
impact on that child?
What they can do today is
Oh,
order a copy
today.
of the book online, and hopefully it will come in the next couple of days. So within the book, it's a children's workbook, so it is for the child to read themselves, and it's
Yeah.
depending on their reading age. It's between 8 and 14. So some children will want to read it by themselves, and I'm talking directly to them,
Hmm.
how they feel, what feelings are, why they might have those feelings, what's happening in their family, what's happening at school. So I'm having a conversation with them directly.
Yeah.
However, there are some issues that are being raised that may be helpful if the child has an adult they can talk to about certain issues. So
Yeah.
it can be read by a Senko or a parent or ELSA. In addition to that, there's a professionals guide, and
Hmm.
that professionals guide is also a free download with the book. So it's for them to think about how they want to use that resource. Where is this child starting off? So
Yeah.
have they been off school? Have they had a sort of patchy attendance? Or have they just all of a sudden stopped going to
Right.
school? So where to tomorrow, what does this child's attendance profile look like? What's changed? What do we know already?
Yeah.
Okay. What is the parent saying? Have they moved into the location recently? Have they had a bereavement? Taken their options? Are they in year 8? Are they concerned about what subjects they can drop, what they can't drop? Is there an undiagnosed neurological condition? So there's a lot of information if you just stick your finger in the wind. What have we got right now?
Yeah.
Okay. And then the next thing is, okay, so depending on what you've got right now, the child may be in some kind of cyclical pattern
Hmm.
of attendance. So they might be coming in for subjects that they like for whatever reason. It could be the teacher, it could be they're good at it. They could have some support in that lesson, and they may not be wanting to come in on the days that they have PE, for example. That can be difficult for some children because of their abilities and their strength and how they feel, they're not good at things. So there could be, if we're looking at what's happening today and tomorrow, we may already have some pretty big clues
Yeah.
as to what's going on and how we can um, get the child to talk to us and share. So what would you like? What would work for you? What would make you want to come in every day, for example?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just a simple question, but the child needs to build a trust with the adult,
Yeah.
whoever it might be, for them to feel that whatever their reason is adequate enough to share. They may
Yeah.
already feel a lot of shame around what
Mm.
this thing is. They might say, "Oh, well, but actually, well, my grandma died 3 weeks ago, and Mum's crying all day, and I don't want to
Yeah.
leave her."
Oh,
you see,
yeah. Yeah.
it could be, there are so many things, and I think we've kind of got this, we've sort of lumped it all together in one big, school attendance. We know if it goes below 85, get the klaxons out.
Yeah.
And I think, yes, it's a policy, it's a strategy, it's part of the machinery of education we want our children in. However, let's just row back a bit and focus on this one individual child.
Yeah. Yeah, more of a personal, a completely more personal approach, and actually looking at the reasons behind it, because there's always reasons, isn't there? And it's just looking at why and
Absolutely,
supporting them.
absolutely.
And I suppose like partnership with parents as well must be an incredibly important part of that as well, because half of it is the parents, isn't it? And trying to include them and make them feel supported as well, because it must be incredibly difficult for parents whose children are wanting to attend school, or aren't, not necessarily aren't wanting to, but are struggling to attend school.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, sometimes unwittingly, parents can be what we call maintaining the avoidance behaviour.
Yeah.
So, if the child is very, very dysregulated and very upset, I mean, I had a parent say to me, every so often, I would just opt for a quiet life,
Mm,
and I'd let him stay home.
yeah.
Because that so then we have to ask ourselves, what's really happening in that dynamic, and what would it take for that child to not be having that, not feeling so upset. um it's actually looking at it in the round in 360.
Yeah.
And this isn't about blaming parents, this is about understanding what their pressures are,
Yeah.
and do they have any other children at home, and what is their daily situation.
Yeah.
And this is not sort of pointing the fingers and I think if the parent feels listened to, and again, if they feel they can genuinely share what's happening with the attendance officer or whoever it is,
Mm,
then you can get somewhere.
yeah.
But if there is this punitive approach, and we've in some boroughs we do still have parents being fined,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and I mean, which is incredibly stressful. So you've all instantly gone into an adversarial mode.
Yeah.
So again, it's about de-escalating that situation, right from the beginning. That the first touch point should be, how can we help you? How can we help
Yeah.
you? How can we help Sarah?
Yeah.
Rather than sending a letter, your attendance has dropped now, your child has dropped to
Yeah.
79%, and it's I know it's time, but in a way it's what we call a false economy with time. You might think you've sent the letter and it's dealt with,
Yeah. It's
but
not, is it?
that can take a lot longer to solve
Yeah.
than actually investing in a meeting, or some kind of conversation that
Yeah.
takes an hour, but you really have some rich information that you can go away and work with and
Yeah.
develop a plan, and then assess, plan, do, review.
Yeah.
That investment in time when you see there is a problem is probably better than relying on the letters and the systems to sort it
Yeah.
for you.
Because I suppose you've got to put yourself in the shoes of the parent who, you don't know the stresses that are going on at home, you don't know the difficulties they're facing, and that letter coming through their door must be incredibly like, oh, frustrating, upsetting, like the anxiety you must face reading that letter that's just about attendance. If you've got valid reasons why attendance is very difficult, it must be really, really difficult, and it already sets it as them against us, doesn't it? It doesn't become a partnership
Absolutely.
if you've just been sent this letter, especially when you go, especially if the child's at primary school and you've been dropping them off, you've been chatting to these teachers every day, and then you get a letter. It's very
Yeah.
like distanced.
Yes, yes, and again, that's because we there's a system. We need
Yeah.
to
Yes.
humanize the system.
Yes. I think that's completely right. Yeah.
But sometimes it's good because if people feel they can hide behind it, they haven't got to have that awkward
Mm,
conversation.
yeah.
But life is full of awkward conversation.
Embrace the awkwardness. Right.
Embrace
Well,
awkward.
Before we go then, Suzy, can you share some links where people can find your website, your books, whatever, your social media, send people places?
Yeah, sure. So Instagram at Happy in School. Twitter is at Radiant Lady. My website is www.happyinschoolproject.com, and you'll find everything there. And I have a YouTube channel, but you can find all the other bits. The website's probably the best place to go, and then little spider arms from there go everywhere.
Brilliant. Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it. Hasn't the time gone fast?
Absolutely, it goes so fast.
Oh, wasn't she a brilliant guest? I just want to bottle her enthusiasm. She's just such a positive and lovely person, and shared some brilliant advice. Do go and look her up and find out about her books and her website, etc. And I'll pop some relevant resources that are linked to this episode below in the show notes on YouTube and on the podcast provider. So thanks again for listening to Send in the Experts with me, Georgina Durrant. Please catch us next time.